Thank you very much. My name is Hardlife Mudzingwa, and I'm the National Coordinator for Community Water Alliance, which is a WASH Environment and Climate Movement. Whose aim is to close gaps on access to WASH environment and climate services, particularly for women and youths, through multi-sectoral community partnerships and alliances. So at the moment, Africa is in the process of coming up with post-2025 water vision and policy. We have had the policy in the past on water at Africa level, and part of the Agenda 2063 for Africa is now to come up with a new policy and vision on water that starts from 2025 up to 2063. And after the process of coming up with that policy, which is being driven by the African Ministerial Committee on Water and Sanitation, which is a collection of ministers responsible for water delivery at Africa level, it will then feed into the process of coming up with a SADC water policy. And part of what is expected is to have national water policies revised in line with the new thrust and vision for the Africa we want when it comes to WASH delivery, which also speaks to issues around climate. So as an institution, as Community Water Alliance, we are participating in that process under the banner of the African Civic Society Network on Water, ANU, which is a partnership with the African Union. So far, there are processes that have happened. The first one being what is called PANAFCON-1, PANAFCON-2, and by end of this month, May, PANAFCON-3 will be held in Zambia, where we are finalizing the vision or the Africa we want around WASH delivery in Zambia. So as an institution, with the support, of course, of the Netherlands Embassy, we will be participating in that event. But prior to that event, there are processes that were supposed to happen at national level, which are clearly laid out by the African Ministerial Committee on Water and Sanitation. The first one being a national consultative platform where WASH actors are given a platform to air their voices around what they think should be the priorities or themes for Africa going forward around issues of WASH. And already government of Zimbabwe has undertaken that process in March 2025. But there is also another opportunity or requirement that the thematic areas which are a building blocks towards the Africa Water Vision should be debated at national level and submissions made in terms of what is our thinking. So as an institution, as Community Water Alliance, we convened a WASH stakeholder consultative meeting yesterday in Zimbabwe, where we had 45 participants coming from international non-governmental organizations that included Oxfam, that included WHH, that included Action Aid, that included Christian Aid, that also included other development partners on WASH. It also had the residents movement. It had human rights institutions like Zim Rights. It also had other actors that were coming from independent commissions supporting democracy in the country. That includes the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission. That includes also the Zimbabwe Media Commission. And government actors that include the parent ministry responsible for water, as well as the parent ministry responsible for climate. So during that consultative meeting, we were debating the 6 thematic papers that were produced by AMCO, which is African Ministerial Committee on Water. And there are deliberations and agreements and resolutions that we came up with around the 6 areas. The first area was around financing WASH investment and resource mobilization, where we are looking at how do we finance investment towards WASH and how do we mobilize the resources that are critical for ensuring that we promote access to wash within communities. We promote water for agriculture within nations in Africa. And we agreed that, number one, at least 5% of the national GDP for African states should be committed towards water. That is water for potable water and water for agriculture and other processes that are required in terms of industrial growth for nations. So 5%, this is what civic society agreed. And we also looked at how do we finance water under circumstances of problems and challenges around resources. Another issue that came out is around debt for climate swaps. We understand that Africa has debts. They owe money to multilateral institutions that include the African Development Bank, that include the International Monetary Fund, that include the World Bank. But we are not blind to the fact that issues around climate, developed nations have a responsibility because they are the major polluters of our atmosphere that have contributed. The industrialization process has contributed towards climate change. And in that manner, we are looking at ensuring that there is a leeway where developing nations are allowed to have debt cancellation in as much as they embrace climate smart interventions on access to water. So that will settle the burden that is lying on developing nations around the repayment of debt. It will also ensure that there is developed nations honor their responsibility around this issue. So that's one of the framework that we think has to accompany resource mobilization towards ensuring that every citizen within Africa has access to wash services. And also the agricultural sector is equally equipped in terms of irrigation that allows small-scale farmers to be secure in terms of food production. Beyond that, we also looked at national fiscal commitment towards WASH. We have had a challenge of limited budget allocations at national level. So it is our thinking that at least 7% of national budgets should support WASH services for us to improve the investment. So that's part of what we agreed. On the second thematic area around water supply, sanitation, hygiene, and wastewater, we had resolutions on this one. The first issue, we understand that there are challenges around non-revenue water in Africa, where water that has been produced is lost through physical losses. That include burst pipes and obsolete infrastructure. So we resolved that there has to be a commitment towards reducing non-revenue water. Here in Zimbabwe, within the city of Harare, 60% of water that is produced is not contributing any revenue to the city. And of that 60%, 35% is lost through physical losses emanating from obsolete infrastructure. So one of the critical points that civic society have said is that we need to ensure that we reduce non-revenue water within Africa to below 20%, so that we improve the quantities of water that are available for citizens and deal decisively with the outbreak of cholera diseases that have been, a menace, particularly in southern region. So that's one area. Then we also agreed that we need to embrace in the policy drinking water safety standards that ensure that citizens within Africa consume safe water. We also want to deal with wastewater. There has been challenges around pollution, and this has been emanating from the industrial processes that include wastewater from sewer treatment plants within Africa and mining. Africa is a resource-rich nation in terms of minerals, but the operations in the mining sector has heavily polluted water resources. So we agreed that we need to have a framework where mining corporations, particularly multinational mining corporations, are friendly to the environment, ensure that they respect groundwater resources and surface water resources within Africa, so that we improve water security for the nation. The third thematic point was around water infrastructure for economic growth and climate resilience, as well as disaster risk reduction. The infrastructure on water, we have changing and varying climatic patterns at the world scene. So one of the key points that were shared was the need to ensure that we build infrastructure that support climate resilience, clean forms of energy to power water production, as opposed to coal and other unpleasant forms of energy. That was one of the sticking points that was resolved. And ensuring that also the infrastructure is supporting economic growth. Majority of nations in Africa have an agro-based economy. So part of what we agreed is the need to invest in water for agriculture, irrigation schemes, our animal husbandry division, etc. The other thematic area is around governance. There are challenges around transboundary water resource management. I'll give you an example of Zamco. We have the catchment for Zambezi River in Angola. And if you are not careful in terms of how we manage these transboundary water resources, they might create conflicts for Africa. Because those that are upstream might not be getting any benefit from the Zambezi River, but their operations there might have a direct impact in terms of the quantities of water that we get within the Zambezi River. We have had challenges, I think you know, although this is also partly attributed to climate change, around Vic Falls. There were no falls in the last years because of some of these issues. So if we don't manage the catchment upstream, so we resolved that we need to embrace proper catchment management at Africa level as a one component. Number two, we need to revisit the water acts of parliament within the nation so that there is harmonization. If we have different legislation which are speaking to different provisions within Africa, we'll have problems. Like you might have in Zambia a case where those that own land are allowed to abstract water. They are called water rights on the ground, as opposed to what happens in Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, we don't have the water rights provision. It was changed after the 1976 Water Act was revisited in 1998. So if we have a situation where a person who owns private land in one nation can abstract water, is given the right to abstract water on the ground, whilst in another nation it's a different case. The conflicts that will happen is that the catchment will not be managed in a holistic manner. So those components are very critical. So we agreed that there is need for harmonization of legislation on water within Africa as part of the governance framework, and improving coordination and participation of particularly young people who comprise majority of the demographic components of the populations within Africa, as well as women. Then we also spoke around information management and the need for GIS to be part of a mapping of water resources, and lastly around gender and social inclusion, where we are looking at the need to ensure that we are gender transformative in terms of our WASH delivery framework, even in the agricultural sector. So this is part of what we agreed, and we are going forward, develop a position paper for civil society that will be presented to government, particularly the minister responsible for water in the country. And thereafter, we are going to carry the same message to Zambia. We are going to be participating there, not only ourselves, but the broader civil society movement that is concerned about issues around water. We have the Institute of Water and Sanitation Development, they are participating. We have also NIO Zimbabwe that represents youths, and we are hoping that other collectives like YET will be also participating under the same banner. We also have women's movement that we expect to be at the PANAFCON-3 in Zambia. So broadly, this is part of what we are championing, and our role as Community Alliance will be to coordinate partners that will be participating at PANAFCON-3 in Zambia. So briefly, I would say this is the journey, and we are expecting that thereafter, the submissions made there will be incorporated in the policy, which will be tabled by end of this year to the African Union. So we would want also a strong voice from the media, so that information is cascaded to reach other members of society that might not have an opportunity to be in Zambia physically. So I think briefly that's all in terms of what we want to do.